Hello, and a very warm welcome to another session of the Corona Committee. Today we are in our 71st session. Yes, it's absolute madness. We founded the committee in the summer of last year. 4 lawyers, Antonia Fischer, Dr. Reiner Fuellmich, and I am Vivian Fischer. And today we're missing Dr. Justice Hoffman, who I think is digging through files. Yes. Anyway, hello and welcome to another session of the Corona Committee. We are in our 71st session today. Yes, it's absolute madness. We have... Could we turn that off, the echo, please? 4 lawyers, Antonia Fischer, Dr. Reiner Fuellmich. Control room, I'm Vivian Fischer, and we have... So, I hope, does anyone on Zoom have YouTube on? YouTube on? Dead.
All right, then.
So, now I hope it works. Yeah. Yes, we are at the 71st session today. The question is, if not now, when? It arises for many reasons. And, among other things, because some really hot topics are coming to light now. On Monday, there was the pathology conference, where I was also present in person, in Reutlingen. It was conducted by Professor Werner Bergholz and Professor Walter Lang, and Professor Werner Bergholz, who we'll have with us shortly, was also there. The detailed findings from the post-mortem examinations of 10 different individuals who died within a very short period of time following vaccination with various COVID-19 vaccines were presented. Well, and some truly frightening things were revealed, namely that it is very, very likely. So for, I believe, 5 of these people, it was very likely. And for 2 other people, Professor Bergholz classified it as probable that they actually died causally from the after effects of a vaccination. So there were thrombotic events to be found, and many had also developed myocarditis. Professor Bergholz, yes, it would be great if you could perhaps briefly summarize some of that for us. And then we have something additional that came up afterwards. Can you hear me?
I can hear you and hope you can hear me too.
Good. We hear you too.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity for allowing me to present these findings here once again. The starting point of Monday's event was that we had discovered the fact that, compared to previous vaccinations, the number of deaths has increased by a staggering factor of 50 for this new so-called vaccination. And that is also relatively independent of who the manufacturer is. When you have such an alarming finding, you have to look into it. And in principle, you do it by looking closely at everything along this entire causal chain. On Monday, our esteemed colleagues Bergholz and Lang presented the comprehensive results of the postmortem autopsies, or carefully presented the detailed results of the tissue sections under the microscope. What we then also saw in the second part was that highly concerning and suspicious findings in the blood samples were identified. In both laboratory findings and when looking closely through a microscope, the blood of recently vaccinated people looks very strange in that there is the so-called rouleau formation, where the red blood cells clump together like a stacked roll of 1-cent pieces, which is very unusual, something medical practitioners might see only once in a very blue moon. And that seems to be the rule rather than the exception here. That can't mean anything good. And then, if we look even further back in this causal chain, light microscope images were also carefully examined, clearly showing that in the individual vaccines, let's say a variety of highly unusual and strange objects were visible, which is fundamentally quite unusual for a vaccine or a therapeutic medicinal product, which actually is quite rare. Contains an active ingredient and otherwise actually no solid objects, no solid state objects, which were in the micrometer range, some even a bit larger. Okay, the remarkable thing now for someone like me who has done such things all his life or his professional life is that there is a problem and then you investigate with all possible methods. We'll get to one of them in a moment. And if, for example, in the Pfizer active ingredient, distinctly square-shaped objects are always clearly visible and identifiable that are remarkably similar to one another. And on the other hand, with AstraZeneca, let's say completely different objects that are also found repeatedly, which look more like a paper airplane, then it is certain that this cannot have a natural origin. What remains open is where it comes from, and the next step would naturally be that the regulatory institute, the Paul Ehrlich Institute, which is responsible for the safety and quality of these vaccines, examines this matter in great detail. So this is, so to speak, the request to Professor Chichutek to ensure as quickly as possible that this is followed up at the Paul Ehrlich Institute. And in business life, where I have about 20 years of experience, it would be completely normal that the respective manufacturer doesn't wait to be asked, but approaches you and says, "Oh dear, what's going on there? Please show us from the manufacturer's perspective your results. And how can we help with that?" Now would be good, of course, if that were to happen now as well. Good. So we have, let me summarize. Conspicuous findings have been established in this investigation. Namely, this isn't just some random finding. It's been seen by many people that these characteristic objects are in there. And what I have here right now is a detailed scanning electron microscope investigation where you can look closely to see exactly which specific elements are in there.
I wanted to say something very briefly. So this document and the analysis, so to speak, people have also come forward following the pathology conference, or we had contact there. It's a team from a university in Germany that can't identify themselves by name at the moment, but they're doing intensive research there. And I really have to say, 1,000 thanks that this is going so well now, that we're also getting results there, which we can then also build upon. And I think, in hindsight, we might also be able to formulate questions where we also hope to perhaps find other research groups all over the world who can accordingly provide us with further information or who can take up the baton there, so to speak. There's a website, I'll mention it briefly here, we'll say it again at the end. It was set up specifically for this, www.pathology-conference.de, and both the press conference and documents, including what we're about to discuss, are already linked there. And the website, all the content, including the press conference, is currently being translated into dozens of languages. It's already available in English, Italian, Spanish. So whoever wants to forward that, also abroad, we're affected by the same problem worldwide. Yes, Professor Bergholz, now we're curious.
Good. Then I would have to share my screen first. I hope that. Can you see that now? Something's coming up. Yes. There should be about 3 little vials visible now. Yeah, we see them. Very good. What you see here are the glass ampules in which the specific and highly concentrated active ingredient is carefully delivered to the skin. We see from Janssen, from Pfizer, that's Comirnaty in the middle, and AstraZeneca is the one on the right. The colleagues working over there now have these glass ampules in their possession, and you have to carefully get the liquid out of them first, of course, before moving on. This is usually, you can't see it in the picture, there's a pierceable membrane at the top. Then you pierce through it with a syringe, which is normally also used for vaccinations. And these drops were then placed on a microscope slide. And before you can put it into the electron microscope, you first have to dry it, because an electron microscope has a vacuum and liquid in a vacuum. They don't get along. So now I have to see that, yes. So an electron microscope looks like this object on the left, and on the right, you see a screen. It's not really that interesting right now, except that you now use electrons for detection. And the beauty of it is you can't just look at an image, as we'll see in a moment, but also determine which elements are in there with the characteristic X-rays. So this is indicated again. The yellow part there in the middle is the electron beam. And it then penetrates 1 to 4 micrometers into the material, depending on what kind of material it is. And there, all sorts of things are backscattered, including, which we'll use in a moment, the X-rays, which are, so to speak, the fingerprint of the elements. So this is exactly what such a completely dried up and parched spot looks like right now. In this case, it's from AstraZeneca. Now, at higher magnification, you can see that something remains, which then, in this case, forms some kind of, well, patterns. The most important thing isn't necessarily the way it appears visually, but right there we can clearly observe 2 red rectangles. There, it was investigated in each case which elements are found there. So, and this is now the result. Now I have to see. It's stupid now that this is in front of it. Unfortunately, I can't change that now. Down there, you can see in any case, it says chromium and iron. That means chromium and iron are either stainless steel components, right? Where does chromium and iron come from in something like this? One can certainly rule out. Well, initially or almost certainly rule out that it comes from the syringe. Although I would suggest to the colleagues that they get such a vial, which is then filled with, say, ultra-pure water, which is sealed, and then as a quasi-blank sample, you do the same with this vial. And then, in all likelihood, you will find neither chromium nor iron. You also see chlorine and sodium. That's certainly because in solution, there was also table salt. And next to it, as any proper experimenter does, you'll look at what's there. And you see, there's certainly also some of the sodium chloride, that is, the table salt, in there. You find carbon almost always, and oxygen too. But the crucial thing is that there's no iron or chromium here, so to speak. A blank sample that shows you that what you see here is only found there, and that was most likely one of the ingredients. If it had come from the syringe, then you'd very likely see something here as well. However, as I previously mentioned, I truly believe it would be highly beneficial for our research if we could still find a way to perform this actual blank experiment. In fact, if you look closely at the screen, you can even see a detailed image of exactly what was formed there, showcasing a wide variety of different and vibrant colors, and the colors of the elements that were identified there. And now we see, for example, that the iron is more in this bluish area. So this bluish or turquoise color, that means iron. That means the iron isn't everywhere, but concentrated here, whatever that may mean. This is a hard fact now. And chromium, that's also the important part now. And also the two occur together. So the source of the chromium and the iron is certainly the same. So looking at Pfizer, we see the same thing happening again. So let's start with the brief overview. And then we observe these kinds of specific dried up patterns. And once again, right here, we can clearly see both iron and chromium, which are present both here and at the second location. And what you actually see there is a distinct third characteristic X-ray line. And that should be nickel. Now, it's not labeled there. You'd have to check the table exactly to see if it's really nickel. However, I believe it is safe to say that we can make that assumption for the time being. And as per various other chemical elements, we might just happen to encounter sodium and chlorine once again. So the same thing again, showing the elemental composition as an image. And right here in this section, you can see iron. Over here on the right, you can find it scattered all over this specific spot, and the exact same thing applies to the chromium. So then Janssen and Janssen. Various things were looked at there. These patterns, how it dries up, it's different in every case. It certainly has a meaning, but at the moment, one can only speculate, which I won't do. And here too, we see chromium and iron. And here you can see these are like, well, also remarkable objects that are in there. So we'll see what that means. And here too, if you look closely, there's a slightly weaker X-ray line in the same spot there. So that's what I'm tentatively assuming is nickel. Okay. Once more, a distribution and where the stuff is. So it's not everywhere. The iron is only in some of the spots. And you can't see it here, but it's indicated, the chromium too. Good. What does that tell us now? I'm going back to... I'm a bit overwhelmed here. How I can change this now? Stop there. So what does that mean? There's iron and chromium in it. Now the question is, where does it come from? So those are the findings now. What I'm saying now is a hypothesis or guess. A very common and frequent source for such iron and nickel, as well as iron-chromium alloys and probably various other metallic elements, is the fact that there was likely some significant abrasion occurring at a specific point during the overall manufacturing and production process. Right? It goes through 3 distinct production stages at BioNTech Pfizer, from what I have gathered. There are even 3 different specialized factories where the vaccine is manufactured. A pre-product is manufactured somewhere in the US. That then goes to a completely different Pfizer factory where the subsequent manufacturing stage of the pre-product is carefully produced. That then goes, as far as I know, to Belgium for production. And there, again, as far as I know, are these bioreactors. There are large bioreactors, which are likely roughly the size of a few hundred liters, where this active ingredient is manufactured on a massive scale, which is then carefully filled into individual glass vials, certainly with various other necessary inactive excipients that are added to the mix. So, where these unidentified metallic objects, as I'll call them, and metallic objects actually originate from, I'd say is currently not visible or completely impossible to determine. So it could be abrasion, but it could also be, we know that at least in BioNTech and Pfizer, but not in AstraZeneca, there are nano objects, these nanolipid particles inside. It's common in the nanomaterial specification, the technical specification, that among other things, the proportion of foreign atoms, especially iron, nickel, and chromium, must also be specified. Why is that? Well, there is at least one complex and intricate manufacturing process specifically designed for these nanomaterials where you might find that. It's called, I can't think of it right now. Anyway, this manufacturing process uses a catalyst where iron or other metals, other transition metals, are often used. So it could potentially originate from that specific location, or it could be a certain amount of surface abrasion from the manufacturing process. So we don't know at the moment. This would really be a call to the manufacturers to get involved there. Since AstraZeneca, at least according to the information we currently have available, does not have any nanomaterials in it. It must be there, so it simply cannot be from such a process. Unless these aforementioned and previously discussed, well, objects resembling small paper airplanes of something in the range of a mere few micrometers in total size, that they should have been added now as well, for whatever specific reason they might have had.
Is it conceivable that this is some kind of adjuvant, some kind of booster? You hear that there? Or I believe that in normal vaccinations, there's also aluminum in there. Partially, or some variant of it, because it somehow leads to a stronger immune response. Is it also conceivable that this could somehow happen with such other metal-containing elements?
That is entirely conceivable, yes. Well, I have initially when these rumors were circulating through the public that there was graphene oxide in there, which in my professional evaluation are still just rumors or hypotheses, I thought, no, there is simply no way that can be true. Then I conducted some extensive and detailed research and found, much to my genuine surprise and amazement, that in the field of experimental cancer therapy, it's apparently quite common, at least in various human experiments, to actually use graphene oxide instead of aluminum as a booster adjuvant, simply because this graphene oxide is substantially and remarkably more effective than aluminum. So it's not entirely, let's say, it's not at all far-fetched where you could say, no, that's absolutely and completely impossible. Also ganz also sagen wir mal, es ist nicht jetzt weit hergeholt, wo man sagen kann, nee, kann überhaupt nicht sein. Zumindest dort. At least there in cancer treatment, it is currently, at least in the experimental testing phase, as documented in several scientific publications. Peer-reviewed, it's explicitly stated there.
And these chemical elements that have now been found, could they also be elements of this graphene oxide? Or is it something else entirely that we can't even measure yet?
Well, if the manufacturing process for the graphene oxide was very sloppy, let's put it that way, either with CVD, that is chemical vapor deposition, which is the inherently clean process. You can also manufacture and produce graphene and graphene oxide from clean graphite by using specific and specialized chemical techniques to more or less delaminate and separate the individual layers of graphene and then subsequently oxidize them. What you can also do, of course, one common approach with graphene and also graphene oxide is to functionalize the surface valences, as it's often called, by the process of intentionally and carefully attaching other elements to give these nanomaterials a variety of specific and highly desirable chemical properties. So that's actually a very common occurrence in medicine, but especially for a wide variety of different applications, depending on exactly what you want to achieve with the materials you're working with.
And now this introduction of these metals there into the body. So what's the deal there? Or also these nanoparticles, it's not a common thing. I mean, we don't have any other area of application except for the cancer field where maybe such experimental things, but such nanoparticles or even these metal elements, whatever that is now, that's actually, you don't usually see that in others.
Well, not known to me, and that's why I was extremely skeptical at first with this whole story, graphene oxide, which has also been brought to our attention in the meantime, that the Japanese colleagues, and I assume the Japanese equivalent of the Paul Ehrlich Institute, actually, and beyond a doubt, positively identified stainless steel particles in the Moderna vaccine substance. Right, and I took a look at it. It actually looks like abrasion. So these are a variety of unusual structures and objects that do not appear to be quite as remarkably similar to the specific patterns that were previously observed on the light microscope with both the BioNTech Pfizer and also with the Moderna vaccines. And that I would say is in all probability some kind of filtered out stuff, which is abrasion. That is, well, I originally come from microelectronics. There, let's say, in the production processes, abrasion from some stainless steel lined equipment is not unusual. This looks very similar to what I witnessed during those Japanese investigations.
And now, yesterday, the person I spoke with said they had found in one of the samples also, well, there were indications of rare earth. Are rare earths, then? Could they also come from such a production process? It's quite unusual, because that's also something very expensive, I think, that you would use it like that in something like a bioreactor or something. Do we have any finding from what that could mean? And what do they do in the body? Are they to be seen differently than these metal compounds?
Well, whether that's used in bioreactors now, I have zero idea. But the manufacturer would have to say that. The only application in medicine that I know of is that in examinations with nuclear magnetic resonance, gadolinium, I hope that's the right one of the rare earths now, is used specifically because it occurs extremely rarely in nature, so that when you see gadolinium, or so that you have few interference signals during the actual examination. Although I have to say, I wasn't prepared for that now. I'd have to double check that myself with my former colleagues at Jacobs University who investigate this systematically. But anyway, just to answer the question one last time. If rare earth elements were found, then that is highly unusual and significant, and they couldn't really have found their way into the samples through mere accidental contamination. Rare earths aren't quite as rare as the name suggests, but then again, they're rare enough that it would be unusual to find them there. There must be a reason for that.
Okay, that's crazy. So I know that further investigations are now pending. Let's say, looking at it at body temperature, or even with the addition of blood, and then maybe letting it dry. Because our blood contains iron, of course. Now, I have no idea about the biological side or the possible reactions that could result from that. But it's a fact that if we have some kind of iron compound in the blood, it might interact in some way with the ingredient. So
That's correct. So hemoglobin contains a lot of iron. Iron is the essential mineral that allows red blood cells to effectively absorb and carry oxygen in the first place, in the lungs, and then unload it where it's needed. And, well, let's just say, I think it's, and please keep in mind this is purely hypothetical, that these specially engineered synthetic nanomaterials can be chemically functionalized and precisely tailored to interact directly and seamlessly with the naturally occurring iron molecules found within our red blood cells. It's theoretically possible, but as I said, pure speculation at the moment. But what isn't speculation at all is this conspicuous rouleau formation. There is clearly a very specific reason for it that has something to do with the particular chemical substance being injected into people who are currently receiving their vaccinations. And that would also need to be thoroughly investigated and clarified. I mean, this is such a striking finding that it must be investigated. So once again, we are issuing an urgent call to the Paul Ehrlich Institute to begin a comprehensive analysis of this immediately, as soon as possible, because it truly has a significant impact on people. And especially as I have come to understand through my studies, if I want to determine blood types, which must be done before a crucial blood transfusion sample is given to someone in a hospital, this process is strictly carried out as a vital safety precaution. And if this rouleau formation or coagulation of the blood of vaccinated people becomes significantly more pronounced, then it is highly possible, or even quite likely, that this specific test simply cannot be performed at all. That means, regardless of whether these blood samples are now good or bad for the recipient, if I can't perform this cross-match, then the blood must not be given or administered, not in that specific manner to the patient who needs blood. It shouldn't be put into the veins of the individual or, well, directly into the bloodstream.
But that's very unsettling because there was also, we had a report from somewhere that even vaccinated people should be encouraged to donate blood or even relatively soon after the vaccination. It's very strange if, in case of doubt, you probably can't even properly identify that in them anymore. And maybe you still have the info from maybe you have I don't know, an ID card or something. I have that written down somewhere. I don't know exactly where it was, but then you would also have a problem where you might not even be able to properly determine that with the blood donors either. It's very unsettling.
Well, what is a certain fact is that in Japan, vaccinated people are not allowed to donate blood. The Japanese, I had many contacts over the years in the past with various Japanese companies and also with the Siemens man in Japan. So the prominent figures, Characteristic of the Japanese is they are incredibly meticulous. And it doesn't surprise me that that it was specifically with the Japanese that all this came up, and they handle it this way. So once again, a hymn of praise for the meticulousness of our Japanese colleagues. So we Germans, who are also considered rather meticulous, or the Prussians of the Western world, we could really take a leaf out of their book. When a Japanese colleague says something or presents findings, then he gets a big leap of faith from me first.
Well, enormous.
To state, a bunch of stuff has been found for which there is no explanation.
Exactly. That must be investigated. It is first and foremost the responsibility of the manufacturers, and to the same extent, the responsibility of the Paul Ehrlich Institute. That institutes or medical professionals or colleagues, Burchard and Lang, are doing this now, and I'm actively dealing with the situation, that's, so to speak, optional. We don't get any money for it. We have no financial interest in this at all, but it's, I would say, our social responsibility to thoroughly investigate this entire matter.
Yes, you're not even the one responsible. You just named those who are responsible. So it's exactly what we're doing here. We're actually not responsible at all. Actually, the Bundestag should have set up an inquiry committee here. We're doing their work. Yes.
Well, enormous. So I also received another email afterwards from, well, various emails also from doctors who were also wondering. For example, a urologist also reached out to us where the question also arose. So just observing now. So to speak, from his concrete observation, the question that women increasingly have urinary tract infections, which somehow can simply no longer be properly managed, and that many men also suffer from prostate problems that have no clear bacterial or otherwise known connection, well, that couldn't be found upon a first initial glance. And the person in question had also requested that, well, this should now be brought together, including experiences that others might have in their practices. So I think it's really important. There is the pathology conference. You can really go to the website now and see about maybe contacting them with such topics, or otherwise, us, the committee. We would then forward it to the appropriate specialists so that we can establish a network there. And that we now, as long as those actually responsible are not doing their job, and the matter is indeed really urgent and pressing, that we make sure the threads come together there, and we get the networking done so that information can be exchanged.
Yeah, I definitely believe that pressing is the most accurate way to describe the current situation. I mean, we are looking at a situation where 12 to 17-year-olds are officially authorized and eligible to be vaccinated, and they are indeed being vaccinated right now. And any individual who is interested in doing so can easily download the specific and detailed public document, Epidemiological Bulletin number 31 from the year 2021, directly from the official Robert Koch Institute website. It explicitly and clearly states that children and adolescents of that particular age group have no statistically significant risk from the infection. And furthermore, they also play no measurable or meaningful role in the overall transmission of this disease. However, we are absolutely certain, and the data is also clearly detailed in this document, that they face a substantial and serious risk of experiencing adverse health complications from the vaccination. And if you now calculate and look at a risk ratio, I really have to emphasize this point very clearly. So the ratio of risk from vaccination divided by risk from infection, we are looking at a factor of 10 to 100. So it's entirely and utterly incomprehensible to me how the Standing Committee on Vaccination arrives at the specific conclusion and statement that they've quantified the risk, and that when you look at the final bottom line, there is a significant amount of evidence that speaks in favor of vaccinating children and adolescents of this age. And then it's also mentioned that this is also to take the psychological pressure off them. Well, that has absolutely no connection to any kind of disease. This psychological pressure is caused by politics? That would actually be there. Well, let's address the situation. Okay, so it looks like we actually have a problem here. And maybe one final remark. In analyzing the problem, so that we really understand what's happening here, we're maybe at 10 to 20%. So we are, as someone once put it so nicely, still in the stage of admiring the problem rather than having understood it. What is really going on here? And once again, a request to everyone who wants to get in, so please get involved. As Miss Viviane Fisher already mentioned, we encourage you to please reach out and contact the Corona Investigative Committee if you have any such laboratory results. And and especially, of course, make sure to notify the Paul Ehrlich Institute and the manufacturers. So please take action and do something.
Yes, Professor Bergholz. It's really very important that we've had this explained a bit more, because it is quite difficult to look at all these highly technical, highly complex processes. That's why it really takes specialists to even look at this at all, especially, for example, the question regarding the nanolipids. There are also these cationic nanolipids that are in there. They also urgently need to be investigated, including their effects. There are only very few specialized laboratories, so there too, if anyone wants to be active in that area. Whistleblowers from the Paul Ehrlich Institute or elsewhere are also cordially invited to use our committee's whistleblower page to send us information. Everything is, of course, confidential, and we're happy to provide attorney-client privilege, so please reach out to us.
Perhaps it is worth making a further detailed remark regarding the complex nature of these nanolipids. The co-founder and head of BioNTech himself once explicitly stated in an interview that the real technical difficulty they faced was actually finding the most suitable and effective nanolipids for the delivery system. And in the official regulatory approval documentation for the EMA's conditional marketing authorization, it explicitly specifies and states, among other things, that highly reliable and consistent characterization methodologies for these nanolipids had to be fully researched and developed by June of this year. I haven't heard anything about whether those exist yet either. So that is quite a remarkable state of affairs. I'm using a material that is certainly not easy to manufacture, but which I cannot examine for its quality and composition according to the state of the art. So it's really pushing the limits that they would dare to do something like that.
Okay, yes, thank you so much. Really very important. We will link everything necessary and perhaps post the websites and so on in the chat again. And then, yes, we'll stay on it.
You're welcome. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much.
Yes. Then let's take a moment to pivot and slightly shift our focus to a different topic, although it follows on quite well from what we've just heard. We're talking about the potential presence of hazardous or concerning substances in the vaccines, which have also been found through detailed pathology. What specific results or conclusions can be drawn from this research when seen in combination with the fact that many adverse reactions are now being observed, meaning unwanted side effects, and many deaths are also being observed? Then this could have consequences under criminal law, but of course also under civil law, result in civil damages, and under criminal law, we could be dealing with homicide offenses here. We need to look into that more closely. But then we need a justice system that actually works. And the question being asked here in Germany is, does this justice system even work anymore? Or has it, perhaps, not just since COVID, but for much longer, been what I once called a smoke and pile of rebel? I tend to lean more toward that latter point of assessment, and to prove that here, at least when it comes to the ongoing conflict with large corporations. Now with COVID, it's about the conflict with many, maybe even all, large global corporations. But it's always been that way in our experience. I can confirm that as a field study, so to speak, based on the observations of us and our colleagues in my firm. Back when we were still very intensively handling the junk property cases, 17 colleagues were working on them. We can only confirm that whenever you take on large corporations in the courts, there's a tendency to somehow accommodate these large corporations. That's politically intended, because we remember the remarks made by Mrs. Merkel, according to which Deutsche Bank is a systemically important bank. One could easily suspect that this means it's so systemically important that it's above the law. And then we're quick At the finding that the small ones are hanged, the big ones are let go, because the full force of the law is applied to the small ones, and with the global corporations, they just look the other way. That's at least my observation, and that of my colleagues.
Empower translations. Translations for all humanity.